Stay competitive with Blue Horseshoe as your guide. Get industry-specific help upgrading to D365, learn how to optimize D365 supply chain management, and see how the Power Platform enables you to collect, visualize, and act on your valuable data. For more resources to strengthen your supply chain, connect with us in our virtual booth.
Please welcome our next speaker, Miselle Mombeshora, a functional consultant. Today, she will be presenting on project operations and what it means for D365 FO SCM. Please stick around after Miselle's session for a live Q&A.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to DynamicsCon. My name is Miselle Mombeshora, and this afternoon we are going to go through D365 Project Operations and what it means for finance and operations. So before I actually go into my presentation for today, I would just like to tell you a little bit about myself. So I am a D365 Functional Solution Architect at HCL Power Objects. In terms of a little bit about me, I'm originally from Zimbabwe and have been in the UK for quite a while, so I actually view that as home now. In terms of what I like doing, I enjoy traveling, I enjoy wildlife, safaris, and I've just put a little bit of what I like at the bottom there. So you can see a little bit of the Victoria Falls and a little bit of wildlife. That's home for me. So in terms of my journey, I started off as a project accountant, did my ACC exams, but I really didn't enjoy that. So decided to jump ship and get onto the technology front. So I have been on the ERP side of things for quite a while and have been involved in multiple implementations across different industries. And, I am really passionate about this. And I am one of the founding members of D365 ERP user group. So if any of you would like to join, I have added my details, my LinkedIn and Twitter details at the bottom. And if you do have any questions after this session that are not answered during this session, so please do reach out on my details below. Now let's get into our presentation for today. In terms of our agenda, I will give you an overview of D365 Project Operations. And so this will just take us through all the key features around this new product, I guess new as in released in October. So I'll take you through some of the key features. And I think what's really important as well is the deployment options. So I will take you through what's available in terms of which option is suitable for your customers or clients. So once we've gone through the deployment options, we will focus on one of the deployment options, which is across the two platforms, customer engagement and finance and operations. We will dwell on what's available with that deployment option and what's not available. And this is particularly from a finance and operations side. So once we've actually gone through that, I will just get into the system at a very high level just to show you what that deployment option actually has in store. And then lastly, because I'm currently going through a D365 Project Operations deployment, actually with one of the deployment options, which is actually my focus for today's presentation, I will just walk you through a few key considerations when it comes to such an implementation. So, right, let's get into it. Let's talk about what is D365 Project Operations. So D365 Project Operations is one of Microsoft's newer offerings, as I said, and it is an end-to-end project management system. So it connects, the sales, resourcing, project management teams all in a single application. So this unifies operations and connects teams in a single integrated offering. So I just want to bring a little bit of emphasis to the integrated because this is one of the key features of the deployment option that I will be focusing on today. So we will get into that a little bit later on. So it also gives you and provides visibility and insight across the life cycle. But of really key interest is what Microsoft has done with this product. So Microsoft has taken the best of features across from 3 applications. So let's have a look at which applications these are. So from D365 PSA, some of you may already know about this product. Microsoft has taken all the capabilities around sales, quotations, and resourcing from this. And then from MS Projects, Microsoft have taken all the good features from the planning side and brought all of those capabilities into D365 Project Operations. And finally, they've also taken some key features from D365 Finance and Operations. And from there, what Microsoft has brought in is the capabilities around project management, costing, and all the accounting capabilities. So it just doesn't stop there. So they've also gone and done some enhancements to the planning tools and the capabilities within that. And they've also applied some intelligence to the scheduling. You'd almost think, wow, there's a lot going with D365 Project Operations. It just doesn't stop there. So what they've also added is, as some of this is built on database, it's customizable and extendable across the Power Platform. So it, facilitates that, ability to customize applications built with Power Applications, and to top it off, when it comes to BI reporting. So all in all, I think it's a fantastic product, and it still obviously has a roadmap. So meaning there's still a lot more other key capabilities that are still coming with this product. So as I mentioned earlier on, D365 Project Operations comes with 3 deployment options. So what we will do is we will just go into the deployment options and what they actually mean for you. So the first one that we're going to talk about is customer engagement deployment option. So this deployment option is more suited towards any of your customers that are looking for a deal to perform invoicing. So this is more from the front end capabilities, say from your sales to your pro forma invoicing. And this would be more suited towards maybe existing PSA customers, those customers that would probably be looking to use just the front end capabilities and integrate to maybe a third-party ERP. So this option here does not have any integration to D365 Finance and Operation. Now let's talk about the second deployment option. So this is the second one, which we're more familiar with, from a finance and operations side. This is almost similar to our classic PMA. So this one here is an option that is more suited for, I would say, any customers that have got stocked or production order scenarios, and any customers that are in warehousing, inventory, and manufacturing. And it does leverage off our classic PMA capabilities. And this option here does not have any integration to customer engagement. So be mindful when you are selecting this deployment option. And lastly, we've got the full deployment. Out of all of them, this one is probably my favorite deployment option. And what it has is, so it's more for resource-based, and obviously customers that don't have any stock or production order scenarios. It's certainly not suited for anyone with inventory, warehousing, and manufacturing scenarios. So I would say any of your existing customers that are probably on PSA and integrating to finance and operations, this would be a suitable deployment option for them. So you're probably wondering why I'm talking about existing PSA customers. Well, we do know that Microsoft will continue to support PSA up till 2024, and they won't be adding any new functionality around this. So I guess it's something that, people need to be mindful that they will start to look into D365 Project Operations and start to talk about or have these conversations with your client. So now this one here, it leverages on both finance and operations and customer engagement capabilities. So let's go a little bit of detail in terms of the capabilities around these deployment options. In terms of the first deployment option, let's talk about which is the light deployment option, or the customer engagement deployment option. So the green here just reflects what's available on the customer engagement front. So there are capabilities around the sales processing that extend the D365 sales application experience. It also has the project planning capabilities. So that's using Microsoft Project for Web. So there's also rich features around multi-dimensional pricing, unified resource management, time tracking, basic expense, and right up till customer-facing invoices. So it's quite rich in its own, but as I said, this is more suited towards those who would probably be integrating it to a third-party ERP system. So now let's look at our second, which is the one that I said is more your classic PMA, or is your PMA deployment, because this just leverages off the capabilities within project management and accounting. So you get your project planning using the work breakdown structure. You still also get all the capabilities around resource management, time tracking, full expense, full invoicing, your revenue recognition. We all know how rich that engine was within PMA, so you get that. And to top it up, it does support production orders and material support as well. So that, as I said, with this one here, there is no integration with this F&O side and CE. So this is just purely sits within the finance and operations side. And then lastly, which is the deployment option, which is going to be our focus for today, what we have, one that sits against the both platforms. So as I mentioned earlier, the green is for the customer engagement, and the blue represent what sits on D365 Finance. So what we've got with this one here is it sits across the two platforms. So obviously it's resource-based. And in terms of capabilities, it obviously will leverage off the sales process, leveraging that extends the Dynamics 365 sales application. You leverages off the project planning using Microsoft Project for Web. So that's like really rich functionality there. And you also get the multi-dimensional pricing, you get the unified resource tracking, time tracking, basic expense, full expense, and then you start to leverage off on receipt, OCR, pro forma, and customer-facing invoicing. You can see it's got all the capabilities from the customer engagement as well as the finance and operational side. So this is quite really a rich option in terms of deployment. And also to top it up, you still get all the revenue recognition capabilities, which we are all familiar with from classic PMA. Be mindful, in terms of knowing what each of these deployment options mean for you, and in terms of what they have, so that you make the right decision when it comes to your customers. So now what we're going to actually talk about is just the key features of that full deployment option. So as I said, this is the option that goes across both the customer engagement side and the finance and operations side. So, as you can see, this still leverages across, in terms of capabilities, it's across the life cycle. So you get your sales, you get your project planning, you get your resource scheduling, you get your project execution, you get your invoicing, revenue recognition. So you've got everything brilliant. But, what I like about this is I think Microsoft has gone for more of an approach that is, well, let's make operational functions sit in a more, I guess if you're used to classic PMA, you would know that when you're on the customer engagement side, it's a lot more user-friendly. So I would say your operational side of processes are on a very much user-friendly UI, and much better than what we had in classic PMA. So that's already a tick box. Now, if you then start to look at in terms of the roles, I already see that the roles such as your sales manager, your project managers those are sitting on your customer engagement side. So these are your operational people. And then what we've got here on the bottom half screen is you can see on the finance side, we start to have the back office side of things. So none of that. And I think it's really interesting because there's already that segregation of roles. But now let's talk about the features across all of these, or the processes around these. So when it comes to our leads and opportunities and quotes, in classic PMA or maybe the PMA deployment option, we probably have capabilities around creating leads, opportunities, and quotes. With this deployment option, you don't have that. They're all mastered and housed on the customer engagement side. So that's one change, so be mindful of that. When it comes to project contracts and projects, these are actually housed in the customer engagement side. So you actually can't create them from the finance and operations side. They have to be mastered there, and it's a one-way integration to customer engagement. So be mindful of that. Then we talk about milestones. So milestones do play a crucial role because they obviously integrate into the finance and operational side and get onto our own account, but also at the same time, they generate what we call our estimate projects on the finance and operations side. So that's just, again, nothing gets created from the F&O side, but it's mastered on the customer engagement side. We start to talk about our project tasks. So our project tasks, again, are mastered on the customer engagement side. They get integrated onto the finance and operations side as just an attribute against a transactional line. So again, we can't create project tasks. This is all mastered on the customer engagement side. Now, of importance is your expense estimate and your resource assignments, because all of this feeds into our revenue estimates or our forecasts, which drive our revenue estimates. So that's of importance. But what we don't have from a finance and operations side is we can't create these estimates. So that's a change. So just be mindful of that. Resources, again, they are mastered on the customer engagement side. From an F&O side, we just probably see them, but we can't actually create them. And when it comes to expense entries and time entries, so I think maybe let's start with the expense entries. The expense entries are actually mastered from the finance and operations side. So that's an interesting one because they actually then integrate to the customer engagement side. And when they integrate to the customer engagement side, they are then integrated back as project actuals to the finance and operations side. So we will obviously talk a little bit about that later on, but it's just interesting to know that when it comes to time entry is only mastered from the customer engagement side. So that's something to be mindful about. When it comes to invoicing as well, invoicing is mastered on the customer engagement side. So we can't actually go into the finance and operations side with this deployment option and actually create invoices. No, that's not possible. So I think it's one of those where we would obviously get to a point where we view our backlog in a case of time and material, or confirm our invoices. The system will then create what they call pro forma invoices, and these get fed or integrated into finance and operations via the integration side of things, which is dual rights, which is what glues and hangs everything together. So all the points that I've been talking about, where all of these features integrate from CE to F&O, they are leveraging off dual rights, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about dual right. But for now, as you can see, we've covered on the invoicing and said, well, that is all mastered on the customer engagement side. What we can only do from the F&O is obviously view, and there's a few other things that we can do, which we'll discuss it a little bit later. Now, when it comes to revenue recognition, a lot of this capabilities that we have in classic PMA or the PMA deployment option, that sits on the finance and operations side. So there's nothing that's changed there. So we still have those capabilities. So I guess from a reporting side of things, you can see with this deployment option, this is across two platforms, customer engagement and finance and operation. So I like the fact that, obviously this is on elements of this are built on Dataverse. So I think obviously meaning we've got the capabilities around Power BI. I see this being quite a useful tool to use when it comes to reporting and pulling all of the detail from the finance and operations side to the customer engagement side. So that's what I guess I would say from a reporting perspective. So now let's actually go into what glues all of this together, and that is dual rights. So the advantage about this, or let's just talk about what it is. It actually is the link for CE and F&O. And this has to be done common data services or Dataverse before anything is configured on the customer engagement side. There is now what we call a company on the customer engagement side. So just be mindful that you need to make sure that you've created and enabled dual rights. There is a configuration guide that Microsoft have released, and my recommendation is read it. Read it and make sure that you follow the process in terms of what needs to happen. Make sure you enable or are running the related maps, because if something is not running, it's likely to cause some issues downstream. So read it, read it, read it. I can't emphasize enough on that one. And in terms of, the capabilities, this is a bi-directional integration. It facilitates that bi-directional integration of data between D365 Finance Operations and Dataverse. This is for documents, for master data, and reference data. So be mindful that there's nothing. I mean, I know, like in a few years ago, I was involved in a PSA implementation integrating into finance and operations side. The whole integration piece was just a headache. Now, what's really nice to know with this deployment option is that, that element is already taken care of by dual rights. So that is just a plus, I think, for both customer engagement and finance and operations. So now let's actually go into some of the key features which are highlighted. And obviously, because of time, there's a lot to talk about, but I'm just picking out some of the key elements and calling out on a few of the things in terms of what's available and what's not available. So when we talk about project contracts and projects, they are mastered on the customer engagement side. So what we don't have anymore with this full deployment is we cannot create project contracts. We cannot create projects within the finance and operations side. So again, I'm comparing back to classic PMA in terms of what we have. Just be mindful that all of that is now mastered from the customer engagement side. So when it comes to project contract customers, yes, again, they're mastered on the customer engagement side. And what we see from the finance and operations side is our funding source. When it comes to the project contract, again, that's mastered on the customer engagement side. And what we are able to do is we are able to view the contract. And when it comes to the contract lines, and these contract lines come across in terms of the billing rules, what's supported is only time and material and fixed price. So in terms of the project again is mastered from the customer engagement side, and it's integrated onto the finance and operations side, and we're able to view them. I mean, but what we're able to do against this is seeing that it's only a one-way, is we're still able to define our financial dimensions from the finance and operations side. So these are mastered in F&O, and the sales tax is also mastered on the finance and operations side. In terms of the funding source, where you've got split and you can define that split, that is now mastered on the customer engagement side. So you won't see that detail on the finance and operations side, but if they say, for example, 2 funding sources, yes, you can be able to see that there's 2 funding sources, but we can't see the detail behind that definition because that's housed on the customer engagement side. So be mindful. And when it comes to the project hierarchies, if you remember the capabilities around hierarchies or sub-projects, we don't have this capability with the deployment option. So be mindful of that. Remember project budgets. We don't have that capability with this deployment option, but I know that there is something on Microsoft's roadmap around this, but nothing yet. So if you are going on to an implementation and one of your customers requires this, be mindful that you don't have that. But as I did touch on the forecast capabilities earlier on, we still are able to do project forecasting. So what else do we not have? So in terms of projects, what we previously were probably used to is several types of projects. So we were used to time and material, fixed price, internal. So internal we still have. Internal they're also mastered from the customer engagement side, and all they are basically projects without a contract. So that capability we still have. But what we don't have is we don't have investment projects. So if you wanted that capability that we had in classic PMA of being able to capitalize, well, you don't have it with this deployment option. And lastly, in terms of what else we don't have is there is no P2P integration to projects at this point. So be mindful, and if it's something that is really key to your solution, then start to look into the workarounds. So another important feature, I guess, is around transaction categories. So in terms of transaction categories, if we knew we had that hierarchy in terms of shared categories, project categories, finance and operations side. So we still have that concept, but again, it's a one way and they're mastered on the customer engagement side. So as an example, if I create a transaction category called applications on the customer engagement side, what will happen is using dual rights. These are integrated onto the finance and operations side. And what you see is what we call transaction categories on our finance and operations side. At the same time, the system will create what they call shared categories. So it will automatically create that application transaction category 4 times, one for expense, one for fee, one for hour, and one for item. So that's quite nice that it does that for us. But what we need to be mindful is from the finance and operations side, we need to manually create the project categories ourselves. So for example, it's more legal entity specific. If I'm not going to use items, I will just create applications expense. So be mindful that this is something that you will need to manually do. So now let's talk about the actuals. So these are our postings from our time and expense entries. They are mastered from the customer engagement side. Although I know that some of the expenses originate from a finance and operations side, when it comes to the actuals, they are confirmed and approved from the customer engagement side. And when that happens, they are integrated to finance and operations using dual rights. We get these on our actual staging on the F&O side, and there is a batch imports this from staging onto an integration journal. So this integration journal is really important because that is the first interaction at which, say, someone from the finance side, or shall I say the back office, because I view finance and operation as a back office, this is the point at which the finance or the accountants actually view what's been posted or the transactions that have come through, or your time and expenses. We're not able to change any values when it comes to this. But what we're able to do is we're able to apply attributes. So we can actually redistribute based on financial dimensions. We can also apply sales tax. So I guess there is limited functionality around, doing any corrections because these have to be done on the customer engagement side. But having said that, we still have the capabilities around adjustments when transactions are posted. So I think it's good to be mindful in terms of these actuals and what the integration journal actually means from a finance and operations side. But one interesting element is the ability to split time into periods from a finance and operations side. So this is one of the settings that we get when we actually get into the system. So now what we are going to actually do is just see how that all ties in together. So you can see from the project management side, we've obviously got our project contracts, we've got our contract lines, we've got our project, and we get our actuals. And through the use of dual rights, that gets integrated onto the finance and operations side. So this is where, again, I'm calling it a back office because that's more the finance, that's more the accounting. That's where our journal posting takes place, because without that posting, we obviously don't get to view our project transactions. And once that's posted, obviously that will feed into our project ledger and subsequently into our general ledger. So at the top of this project accounting side, you can see that we've got what we call our cost and revenue estimate profiles and our profile rules. I'll touch a little bit about this when we get to our slide, which is on revenue recognition. But I just wanted to, bring you to the attention of how all of this glues together, and then also get you to see the differentiation in terms of what happens on the project management side and what happens on the project accounting side. So all the project accounting side, that's what we have in our finance and operational side. So let's talk about invoicing. So when it comes to invoicing, I would say, again, they are confirmed. These invoices are confirmed on the customer engagement side. What we actually get to see from a finance and operations side is, the invoice proposals. So we can't create, but we can see the proposals come across onto the system. And be mindful that when it comes to any unbilled sales transactions, so this is your time and material, if there are, those unbilled sales are not posted, you will see an invoice proposal header of a 0 value. And what we just need to do in this case is ensure that our import from staging is running. And I would recommend that we would just have a batch job set up that's recurring. So that will just be picking up all our actual staging. So at that point, you would then get your invoice proposals lines created in the system. I mean, there's a whole lot of new features which are around business document management. There's a lot of cool things that we can do on the invoicing side. But I think what we just need to be mindful about is that there are no capabilities of actually creating the invoices from a finance and operations side. And when it comes to some of these corrections as well, they need to be mastered from the customer engagement side. So be mindful of this. When it comes to revenue recognition, I think this is probably one of the key features that probably is still intact, because that's still housed on the finance side. So we still have the reach capabilities around that engine. Nothing's changed. So we still have the capabilities around cost and revenue recognition connected. Revenue can be accrued at the time of posting or at invoicing. And obviously, you can actually, wherever there's accrued revenue, we can actually reverse that at time of invoicing. So in terms of fixed price, it still leverages off the features that we've always had. The cost and the revenue recognition are separate. The revenue can be recognized at invoicing time, so fixed price. With no WIP, you've still got all the capabilities in terms of a simple fixed price or the advanced. And in terms of determining when revenue can be recognized, so this is just leveraging off completed percentage or contract complete, or the completion of tasks, which are mastered from the customer engagement side. So be mindful, nothing that we've actually lost out in terms of that capabilities. But what's interesting is that where we previously defined a lot of these things against the project group, Microsoft have come up with what we call project cost and revenue profiles. We'll touch a little bit of those when we get into the system. So I've highlighted on a couple of, what you have and what you don't have in terms of features and capabilities. So what we're actually going to do now is just get into the system for a quick, 2-3 minutes, so you get a feel of the system. Let's get into it. So right, this is what you see from finance and operations side. I'm just going to navigate quickly into project management and accounting. So this is what you see when you've got the full deployment enabled. And if I click on the other side, I just want to quickly show you what the classic PMA option would look like. So very busy, as you can see. So with the time that we have, we will just quickly go and see where, in terms of our projects, as I touched on, in terms of projects and project contracts, in terms of what we can do, we can still see our plan, manage, control. So we've got those capabilities. All we can't do is create. We can see our invoice proposals. We can see our pending and our posted transactions. When it comes to control, You can see your project statements, you can see your cash flows. So there's still a lot that we can still do. And in terms of, this is what's important to us in terms of gluing things together, we can actually define our project group, we can define our sales tax group, so whatever it might be, and in terms of our financial dimensions. So be mindful here in terms of financial dimensions, they need to be defaulted. They can be defaulted against your project contract or your project. What we don't have though is where any dimensions are defaulted against a resource. And when a resource books a time entry, we lose any of that when it comes to the integration journal. So be mindful, you might need to do an enhancement around that area in order to be able to report on the cost and revenue based on the dimensions against the resource. So when it comes to our integration journal, I just want you to quickly have a feel in terms of what you see. So this would come based on your time period split that you've defined on your parameters. When you quickly go on the lines, let's have a look. When we go on the lines, you can actually see, if I was to edit here, I will not be able to change anything when it comes to the hours. I can only view, but I can't change, but I can click on my distribute amounts and I can actually tell the system in terms of this time entry, this is where I can define, the dimensions against integration journal. So you could also do the same for tax, as I mentioned. I probably won't do that due to time, but that's what you will be able to do. So now if we can also go into one or two areas in terms of project invoice proposals, this is what you will see. This one here, I'm assuming that it means that the time has not been posted. So this, you're just seeing the header, and until import from staging has been run, and this is the one I recommend, just have a batch job running. This is what's going to happen. I'm not going to dwell much in terms of the postings because nothing's changed there. I'm not going to dwell much around the revenue setup, but I just want you to be mindful that this has been replaced with project cost and revenue profile. So if I click on that, this is where you see, this is where you define out your ledger, and this is where you define your estimates. So, roughly, these are all like rich topics for another day in terms of the capabilities around these areas, but I just wanted you to have a high level feel in terms of what this looks like. You're not losing much, but I think the key thing to take here is that you're not able to create, you're able to view, you're able to apply attributes, you're able to apply tax to certain transactions, you're able to define some dimensions against projects, against contracts, but we don't have the capabilities around creating. So now what I just want us to do is to just quickly go back to our demo so that we wrap up. I've got one more slide, which is just sharing a few key considerations. So in terms of wrapping up this, let's just have a couple of key considerations around this. I've got a few around data. I would just say plan work, pay attention to any migration requirements that require the use of the API to load data. And, in terms of your build strategy, make, considerations that it's across two platforms. When it comes to environments, just ensure that environments are in sync. When copying environments across, ensure that your dual rights is enabled, obviously, and also consider the storage capabilities when doing the planning. Think about your licensing as well. So check all your requirements, and if you're going to use any other D365 products, to ensure that you've got the right mix. And when it comes to enhancements and roadmaps, I would just give advice to that. Just check with Microsoft before you go and do any enhancements to see if it's something that's on the roadmap. Enjoy this product. Thank you ever so much for watching or attending my presentation. Thank you to DynamicsCon for making this possible. And if you've got any questions, please just put them on the chat. Thank you once again.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
So I guess thank you for attending our session. And I think, Paul, you've probably gathered a couple of questions. So let's get on to the questions. Certainly hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, so we had a couple of interesting questions come up. So one of the first ones was, how is percent complete based revenue recognition supported? Is that all F&O or is it in project ops? So largely it hasn't changed, but it's definitely different in places. So obviously the percentage complete is driven by the CE side of things. So that's where you're putting in your regular estimates. That's where you're tracking your work to complete. So that's driving your estimates and the starting position for it. So estimates are integrated into the F&O, and that's where it kind of kicks in using that standard functionality. So you are able to set up those profiles, and this is where it's slightly different. So I know Miselle mentioned the cost and revenue profiles. That's one of the key differences. So this is where you're going to configure your revenue recognition rules, and obviously you've got quite a lot of the standard ones there that you used to have. I believe there are a couple of missing ones at the moment. But so those are configured. It's then the rules. So the rules target the types of projects coming in, so you can set those up against individual contracts, individual projects, and that defines how you're going to treat that incoming project or contract. And then from there on, it's pretty much standard. You've got your estimate projects. You're able to adjust those percentage completes. But interestingly, it only posts into the F&O side of things. So it's posted into what used to be classic PMA and then through to your general ledger. It's not posted back into the project operations CE side of things. So hopefully, I think that might answer that question. Another interesting question raised by Asim was around journals, which I do find quite a big topic. So he asked whether the integration journal was an F&O journal, and yes, it is. But interestingly, it's the only F&O journal, which is key. So for kind of one single truth, everything is posted through project operations, the CE side of things, and comes through as an actual.
Yeah.
So we do, for that, have the ability to post some journals in CE, but they are kind of more around corrections. So you can post hours, you can post expenses. However, there's no double entry concept in CE side of things, and you are having to use configured offset accounts when they do come through to your finance system.
Yeah. So was there any other questions, or I know there was a few that I answered earlier. There was one from, was it Jack? I can't remember. Did we cover it? I know he raised...
I mean, there was another one around inventory and maintenance. So I will touch on that one. So at the moment, and I think it's a short-term consideration. There's no ability to do anything with items in terms of selling or adding as expenses onto projects. I believe that's a very near roadmap release for Microsoft. So I think that's just a short-term one.
Yeah.
And those were the questions I gathered. I know there was discussions around licensing.
Yep. Okay. There's one that Jack sourced. Are you aware of any news about what project operations means for finance and operation, the project and accounting module? So I think what you have is those three deployment options. I think that's the future. So it's either you are going with the one that's really CE, and maybe your customer is integrating to a third-party ERP, or you're going with the one that was the focus of this presentation, which is the full deployment that's across both platforms, or the classic PMA. So
I think reading between the lines, PMA is going nowhere, because ultimately manufacturing exists in finance and operations, and PMA is going to be a key component to that. And I have seen around the fact that they're targeting the fact that classic PMA is going to work with manufacturing. So I don't see it going anywhere. But in terms of professional services, I think ultimately your choice would be project operations.
The full deployment,
The full deployment.
Yeah. I mean, by virtue of them actually calling out the classic PMA as a deployment option, I think it just signals that it's probably not going anywhere.
Yeah. We do have a couple of questions that we've been asked from clients, if you want me to raise that type of consideration.
I think it might be beneficial. It might be beneficial. Because we're currently on a project operations, this full deployment option. Myself and Paul work together. I would say Paul is probably the pro in this. So I think we can just share a few questions that have been raised, which hopefully might be helpful for you guys in your future implementations as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen it quite a lot. So one of the key questions we get asked is, can we post accruals onto CE for project operations? Ultimately, no, you can't. But I think more so now with project operations, we're starting to realise that the project accounting isn't just about a sub ledger or a module. It's about the whole concept of being able to track costs against the project code. So ultimately, what we're telling the client is that project operations isn't set up to start reporting on how am I performing at the end of this month and what costs am I missing, what prepayments have I got. It's looking at a bigger picture in terms of how is my project performing against the estimate for this project. To capture that kind of monthly reporting, we're tracking that through the general ledger with a dimension where we can have that kind of adjusted look at the project. So we still get that information. It just doesn't exist in a sub ledger or in project operations. It exists through Power BI or consolidated reporting.
Yeah.
So that's been an interesting question. See if there's anything coming up in the chat before I move on.
No, nothing.
And I guess another one, which is probably not just isolated to project operations, is where are customers mastered? I do think project operations brings a new spin on this. So very early in the pre-sales, in the sales life cycle. So even as you enter into an opportunity, project operations out of the box is trying to create records in your finance system. And we see that as a bit of a challenge. So these aren't exactly records that are qualified or customers that are qualified, that we're not ready to deal with them yet. Project operations is trying to create them. So we are looking at something to slightly delay that. It's a different concept to F&O where you wouldn't have a customer until potentially you were winning a quote or whatever, but they are getting created a bit earlier.
Yeah. And maybe even on the purchase invoice side, maybe that might be another.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So it's easy to want to post through purchase invoices. So I think there's a balance here. Clients just want to post purchase invoicing, but what project operations is wanting to do is for you to be able to estimate and your work winning. So there are options to start incorporating some of these costs into a standard cost of labour, and there's a balancing act. I don't know if you're on mute, Miselle. Oh, I can't ultimately, but
can you not hear me?
There is a balancing act in terms of what we should try and include as standard and try not to just constantly post purchase invoices through, but there is a need. And at the moment, we're having to do a bit of a workaround. So we are having to post to the general ledger and then do a journal in project operations to bring that through and then manage that offset. But we know, again, that there's something coming in that's on the roadmap for that. So again, we'll have something around purchase ledger integration.
Yeah. Maybe lastly on the payroll as well, because I think that's another good question that we've had.
Yeah, it's, again, I think not everyone's accustomed to this idea of a standard cost, and it does require maintenance, and it does require a consideration of how you structure your chart of accounts. Yeah. So payroll will not be posted directly to projects. Time will be booked using standard cost, and obviously that will flow through. Yeah. But yeah, so it's and then obviously you've got your idea of offsetting in your profit and loss or your balance sheet, but ultimately tracking. I think what we are doing for clients is we're using the worker dimension to help facilitate that reconciliation between your standard costs coming through and your actual payroll.
Yeah. So, I mean, I certainly think we've covered all the questions that we have, and I certainly hope that we've actually shared with you as well in terms of our journey as we go along with the product. I guess if there's no other questions, I would like to take this time to thank everybody for attending our session, and certainly hope there's something that you're all taking away with what we've shared today. And certainly do look out for Microsoft, because they're continually improving the product. So look out in terms of their releases. I know we've got one coming up now in April, and hopefully another one in October. So look out for those in terms of new features. Thank you.